Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the small window as her transport ship moved closer to Nexus Station. The massive structure looked like a giant metal flower floating in space. Its arms reached out in all directions, each one bigger than any building she had ever seen on Earth. She tried to count the docking ports, but stopped when she reached 50. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled them away from the window. The shaking had nothing to do with excitement. Her immune system was acting up again, making her joints hurt and her muscles weak. She had taken her medicine that morning, but space travel always made her condition worse. Elena was 28 years old and had spent most of her adult life studying alien life forms. She knew more about xenobiology than almost any other human alive. But as she looked at Nexus Station, she felt very small and very sick. The transport captain, a gruff man named Torres, walked over to her seat. "First time seeing a League station?" he asked. Elena nodded. "It's incredible. How many species work there?" 12 different ones, last I heard. Maybe more now. They don't tell us humans much." Torres scratched his beard. "You sure you want to do this, Doc? Most humans who go to Nexus don't stay long." Elena had heard the same warning from her friends on Earth. The Galactic League had only started accepting humans 5 years ago. Most human visitors came back early, saying the other species treated them badly. But Elena had worked too hard for this chance to give up now. "I'll be fine," she said, though her voice sounded weak even to herself. The docking process took 3 hours. Elena spent most of that time in the bathroom, throwing up from the motion sickness. By the time the ship finally stopped moving, she felt terrible. Her medicine bag was already half empty, and she had only been in space for 2 days. The station's main corridor was huge. The ceiling was so high that Elena could not see the top clearly. Beings of all shapes and sizes moved past her. Some walked on legs like humans, but had 4 arms and blue skin. Others floated through the air, looking like living clouds made of light. A few crawled along the walls using tentacles, leaving slimy trails behind them. Elena tried not to stare, but everything was so strange. On Earth, she had only seen pictures and videos of other species. In person, they were much more intimidating. A tall figure approached her. It stood nearly 8 feet tall and looked like a cross between a dragon and a person. Its skin was dark red and covered in small scales. When it spoke, Elena could see rows of sharp teeth. "You must be the human," it said in perfect English, though its voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "I am Ambassador Kethmer of the Draconian Empire. Welcome to Nexus Station." Elena tried to stand up straight, but a wave of dizziness hit her. She grabbed the wall for support. "Thank you, Ambassador. I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez." Kethmer looked down at her with what might have been concern or disgust. Elena could not tell the difference. "Are you ill? Perhaps humans are not suited for space travel after all." "I'm fine," Elena lied. "Just tired from the journey." The ambassador made a sound that might have been laughter. "Come, the Research Council is waiting to meet you." As they walked through the station, Kethmer explained how things worked. The Galactic League was made up of 12 species, each more advanced than humans. The crystallines could think for thousands of years before making a decision. The Vertani could change the shape of matter with their minds. The Zephyrians shared thoughts among millions of individuals. "And what can humans do?" Kethmer asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Elena thought about all the things humans were good at. They solved problems quickly. They adapted to new situations. They never gave up, even when things looked impossible. But compared to species that could live for millions of years or change reality with their thoughts, those skills seemed very small. "We learn fast," she said finally. Was all Kethmer said in response. The Research Council met in a room that was even bigger than the main corridor. Representatives from all 12 species sat in a circle. Elena was given a chair in the center, making her feel like she was on trial. Dr. Zixtala spoke first. The crystalline looked like a walking diamond, with light dancing inside its transparent body. Welcome, Dr. Vasquez. We have reviewed your work on Earth. It shows promise, though human science is still quite primitive. Elena bit back her first response. Her research had solved problems that had puzzled scientists for decades. But she was here to learn, not to argue. We have decided to assign you to mineral analysis, continued Dr. Zixtala. You will be studying rock samples from dead worlds. It is simple work, suitable for someone of your capabilities. Elena felt her heart sink. She had hoped to work on living alien organisms. That was what she had trained for her entire career. But studying dead rocks? It felt like being sent to the back of the class. Of course, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm grateful for any opportunity to contribute. Another council member, something that looked like a floating jellyfish made of electricity, spoke up. The human will have access to level 3 laboratory facilities. Standard security clearance only. Elena noticed how they called her the human instead of using her name. It made her feel like a specimen rather than a colleague. After the meeting, Kethmer showed her to her quarters. The room was small and smelled strange, like metal and ozone. The gravity felt wrong too, lighter than Earth but heavier than the transport ship. Dinner is served in the main hall at 1800-hour station time, Kethmer said. Though I doubt the food will agree with your human digestive system. Elena sat on her narrow bed after the ambassador left. Through her small window, she could see part of the galaxy spinning slowly past. Somewhere out there was Earth, where people believed in her enough to send her here. She opened her medicine bag and took out her evening pills. Her hands were still shaking, and her joints ached from the strange gravity. Tomorrow she would start looking at rocks from dead worlds, work that any first-year geology student could do. But Elena had not come this far to give up now. She had always been the sick kid who could not run as fast as the others. The weak student who had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. If the Galactic League wanted to test her, she would show them what humans could do when they refused to quit. 3 months had passed since Elena arrived at Nexus Station. Her small laboratory was tucked away in the lowest level of the research wing, far from the important work happening above. Every day, she received boxes of rock samples from dead worlds across the galaxy. Her job was simple. Scan them, record their basic properties, and file the data. The other researchers mostly ignored her. When they did speak to her, it was to ask her to move out of their way or to remind her that certain areas were off limits to humans. Elena had learned not to take it personally, but some days it was harder than others. Her health had not improved. The station's artificial atmosphere made her lungs burn, and the weird gravity shifts between sections left her dizzy and nauseous. She spent most of her free time in her quarters, reading medical journals and trying to figure out why her medicine was not working as well as it used to. But something strange was happening with the rock samples. Elena first noticed it during her second month. She was running routine scans on a chunk of gray stone from a planet called Zarian 7. The basic tests showed nothing unusual, just common minerals found on dead worlds everywhere. But when she ran a quantum resonance scan, something odd appeared on her screen. The rock was vibrating, not physically, but on a quantum level. The vibrations were so small that most sensors would miss them completely. Elena's human-built scanner was old and crude compared to the League's equipment, but it was also more sensitive to tiny variations. Elena ran the test 3 more times to make sure. Each time, the result was the same. The rock contained traces of artificial quantum signatures, patterns that could not occur in nature. She tried the same test on other samples. Most showed nothing unusual, but about 1 in every 50 samples had the same quantum signatures. Elena spent 2 weeks mapping the patterns, working late into the night when her insomnia kept her awake. What she found made her hands shake with excitement instead of sickness. The quantum signatures were not random. They formed a mathematical sequence, like a code written in the language of quantum physics. More importantly, Elena could see that the sequence was incomplete. These rocks were not just carrying quantum signatures, they were pieces of something larger. Elena prepared her report carefully. She checked her data 5 times, wrote everything in the clearest language possible, and made simple charts that even non-scientists could understand. When she submitted her findings to the Research Council, she felt proud of her work for the first time since arriving at the station. The council meeting was scheduled for the next day. Elena put on her best clothes and arrived early, carrying copies of her report and her raw data. She had practiced her presentation until she could give it perfectly. Dr. Zixthala did not even look at Elena when she entered the chamber. The crystalline was discussing something with a Vertani council member, their conversation happening too fast for Elena to follow. "Ah, yes," Dr. Zixthala said when she finally noticed Elena, the human with her rock report. "Please make this quick. We have important matters to discuss today." Elena stood in the center of the circle and began her presentation. She explained how she had found the quantum signatures, showed her data, and described what the mathematical patterns might mean. She spoke clearly and tried to sound confident. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then Dr. Zixthala made a sound like breaking glass. Elena realized the crystalline was laughing. "This is exactly what we expected from human analysis, Dr. Zixthala said. Your species has a well-known tendency to find patterns where none exist. It is a flaw in your evolution. You survived by seeing threats that were not really there." Ambassador Kethmar nodded his massive head. "Humans see faces in clouds and hear voices in static. Your primitive pattern recognition systems create meaning from random data. The floating jellyfish being spoke up. The quantum resonance you detected is simply background radiation. Your equipment is too crude to filter it out properly." Elena felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. "But the mathematical progression is coincidence," Dr. Zixthala cut her off. "Mathematics is a universal language, Dr. Vasquez. Random sequences will sometimes appear to have meaning, especially to minds that desperately want to find it." Another council member, one that looked like a walking tree made of metal, added, "Perhaps the human should return to simpler tasks. Basic mineral classification without analysis." Elena stood there for a moment, holding her carefully prepared charts. 3 months of work dismissed in 5 minutes. Her discovery reduced to human paranoia and primitive thinking. "I understand," she said quietly. "May I return to my laboratory?" "Of course," Dr. Zixthala said, already turning away. "Please remember to keep your future reports factual. We do not have time for human imagination." Elena walked back to her lab feeling smaller than ever. But as she sat in her chair, looking at her data on the computer screen, she knew she was right. The patterns were real. The quantum signatures were artificial. Something was hidden in these rocks, and the council was too arrogant to see it. That night, Elena could not sleep. Her chronic condition often caused insomnia, but tonight her mind was racing with thoughts about her discovery. If the council would not listen to her, she would have to prove it herself. She returned to her lab after midnight. The station was quiet, with only emergency lighting in the corridors. Elena felt like a thief as she walked through the empty hallways. In her lab, Elena pulled up the files for every sample she had tested. She created a map showing which planets the quantum signature rocks came from. What she saw made her heart race. The samples with quantum signatures came from 17 different star systems. They were scattered across League space, but they formed a pattern. Elena could see it clearly when she mapped their locations. They were arranged in a perfect spiral, like the arms of a galaxy. But why would someone place artificial quantum signatures on dead worlds in such a specific pattern? And who had the technology to do it? Elena tried to access the historical files for those star systems. She wanted to know when the League had first visited these worlds, what they had found there, and why the planets were dead. But when she entered her access codes, a message appeared on her screen: insufficient clearance level. Elena stared at the message for a long time. The Council had given her standard security clearance, which was supposed to include access to basic survey data. If these files were classified beyond her level, it meant the League was hiding something. Elena was not a computer expert. She had learned basic programming in college, but nothing that would help her break into classified files. However, she had something that the other species on the station did not have. She understood how individuals thought and felt. The League's security systems were designed to stop logical attacks from highly intelligent species. They were built to resist the kind of systematic approach that a crystalline or Vortani might use. But they were not designed to stop social engineering from a species that understood psychology. Elena spent the next week learning everything she could about the beings who had access to the classified files. She watched how they interacted with the computer systems. She listened to their conversations in the hallway. She learned their habits, their schedules, and their weaknesses. Dr. Venthak was a Zephyrian researcher who worked in the Xenorchaeology department. Unlike most of his species, who shared thoughts with the collective mind, Dr. Venthak was what they called a singleton, an individual who had been separated from the hive mind due to a rare genetic condition. This made him lonely and eager for individual recognition. Elena approached him during lunch break, when he usually sat alone in the cafeteria. "Dr. Venthak," she said, sitting down across from him. "I've been reading about singleton psychology. It must be difficult being the only individual of your species on the station." The Zephyrian's 4 eyes all focused on her at once. He was not used to anyone showing interest in his condition. "It is challenging," he said slowly. "Most beings here do not understand what it means to think alone." Elena nodded sympathetically. "I can imagine. Humans are individuals too, so I think I understand better than most. Have you found ways to cope with the isolation?" For the next hour, Elena listened to Dr. Venthak talk about his loneliness and his struggle to prove himself as an individual researcher. When he mentioned his current project studying ancient civilizations, Elena asked innocent questions about his methods and resources. By the end of their conversation, Dr. Venthak had given Elena his personal access codes, thinking she was just a friendly colleague who understood his struggles. That night, Elena used those codes to access the classified files on the 17 star systems. What she found made her blood run cold. Elena stared at her computer screen, reading the classified files for the 3rd time. Her hands were shaking, but not from her medical condition. The documents she had accessed told a story that made her feel sick with fear. The 17 star systems with quantum signatures had not always been dead. Each one had once supported thriving civilizations. The League's archaeological teams had found ruins of great cities, evidence of advanced technology, and signs of billions of intelligent beings. But every single civilization had vanished suddenly, leaving behind only empty worlds and mysterious artifacts. The League called the vanished civilization the Harbingers, because they seemed to appear shortly before other species went extinct. Archaeological evidence showed that the Harbingers had visited hundreds of worlds across the galaxy over millions of years. Every place they visited eventually became lifeless. But the most frightening part was what the League had done with this information. Instead of treating the Harbinger artifacts as a warning, The League leadership saw them as an opportunity. The classified files contained records of secret excavations, hidden research projects, and attempts to reverse engineer Harbinger technology. The League believed they could control whatever. Power had destroyed entire civilizations. Elena found shipping manifests showing that Harbinger artifacts had been moved to secure facilities throughout League space. Research notes described attempts to activate the artifacts and study their quantum properties. Most terrifying of all, Elena found evidence that the League had been secretly assembling the artifacts. Believing they were components of some kind of super dash weapon, Elena discovered that her rock samples were not just random pieces from dead worlds. They were fragments of Harbinger devices, scattered across the galaxy when the original artifacts had been damaged or destroyed. The quantum signatures she had detected were not just marks, they were active signals. Pieces of a larger communication network. As Elena read deeper into the files, she realized something that made her heart race with terror. The quantum signatures were not just communicating, they were counting down. Elena pulled up her own data and ran new calculations based on what she had learned. The mathematical progression she had found was not random. It was a timer, and it was running out. Based on the rate of quantum decay in the signatures, Elena estimated they had less than 6 months before whatever process was counting down would reach zero. Elena worked through the night, checking her calculations over and over. She mapped the locations of known Harbinger artifacts, tracked the movement of League research teams, and tried to understand what would happen when the countdown finished. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same terrifying conclusion. The Harbingers had not just destroyed other civilizations. They had left behind a failsafe system that would activate if anyone tried to use their technology. The League's secret research had triggered an automated response. And now every Harbinger artifact in the galaxy was counting down to activation. Elena had no idea what would happen when the timer reached zero. But she could guess it would not be good for any living being in the galaxy. Elena printed out all the evidence and prepared a new report. This time, she did not focus on quantum signatures or mathematical patterns. Instead, she wrote about the countdown, the danger to all galactic civilization, and the need for immediate action to disable the Harbinger artifacts before it was too late. Elena requested an emergency meeting with the Research Council. She waited outside the council chamber for 4 hours before Dr. Zixthala finally agreed to see her. "This is highly irregular," the crystalline said when Elena entered the chamber. Only 3 council members were present this time. "We do not typically grant emergency meetings for mineral analysis reports." Elena took a deep breath and began explaining what she had discovered. She talked about the classified files, the countdown timer, and the danger to the entire galaxy. She showed her calculations and her evidence, speaking as clearly and calmly as she could manage. The 3 council members listened in silence. When Elena finished, Dr. Zixthala made that breaking glass sound again. "Dr. Vasquez," the crystalline said slowly, "are you claiming that you have accessed classified League security files?" Elena's heart sank. She had been so focused on the danger that she had forgotten to hide how she got the information. "Yes, but that's not important. What matters is, it is very important," Ambassador Kethmer interrupted, his voice like grinding stone. "Unauthorized access to classified files is a serious crime. How did you obtain the access codes?" Elena realized she was in trouble, but the countdown was more important than her personal safety. "Dr. Venthak gave me his codes, but I didn't tell him what I was going to use them for." "Please, you have to listen to me about the Harbinger artifacts. The galaxy is in danger. The floating jellyfish being pulsed with angry colors. You manipulated a colleague to commit security violations. This is exactly the kind of primitive human behavior we expected. But the countdown," Elena started. "Enough," Dr. Zixthala cut her off. Dr. Vasquez, you will be confined to quarters pending a full investigation. Station security will escort you from this chamber. Elena felt panic rising in her chest. You have to listen to me. The artifacts are counting down to something terrible. We have less than 6 months to stop it. Your human paranoia has led you to commit serious crimes, Kethmer said, standing to his full 8-foot height. Perhaps isolation will help you understand the seriousness of your actions. Security guards arrived within minutes. They were draconians like Kethmer, but even larger and covered in armor. They did not speak to Elena as they escorted her through the station corridors. Other beings stopped to stare as she was led away like a criminal. Elena's quarters felt like a prison cell now that she could not leave. The door was locked from the outside, and her computer access had been cut off. She could look out her small window at the stars, but she could not contact anyone or access any data. Elena paced around her tiny room, her mind racing with thoughts about the countdown. Every hour that passed was another hour closer to whatever catastrophe the Harbingers had planned. The League leadership was so focused on their wounded pride and their rules that they could not see the real danger. Elena tried to think of ways to escape or communicate with someone who would listen. But she was just a sick human woman, locked in a room in the middle of space. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy had dismissed her warnings as primitive. Human imagination, as Elena sat on her narrow bed. She thought about all the ways the other species had called humans weak and primitive. They said humans were too emotional, too irrational, too quick to see patterns that were not there. But what if those weaknesses were actually strengths? Elena's immune system attacked her own body because it was too active, too ready to fight threats that might not exist. But that same overactive immune system had made her sensitive to quantum fluctuations that other beings could not detect. Her insomnia, which the doctors called a disorder, had given her time to study patterns when everyone else was sleeping. Her desperation, born from being constantly underestimated, had driven her to take risks that no rational being would attempt. Elena realized that her human weaknesses had allowed her to see dangers that the advanced species had missed. The crystallines thought too slowly to recognize immediate threats. The Vortani were so focused on manipulating matter that they ignored information patterns. The Zephyrians shared thoughts so efficiently that they could not think outside their collective knowledge. But humans were different. They saw threats everywhere because their ancestors had survived by being paranoid. They found patterns in chaos because their minds were built to expect danger. They took desperate risks because they knew that sometimes the impossible was the only option. Elena looked out her window at the galaxy spinning past. Somewhere out there, ancient alien artifacts were counting down to an unknown catastrophe. The most intelligent beings in the galaxy had dismissed the threat because they could not imagine being wrong about their own. Superiority. Elena had always been the sick kid, who was too weak to keep up with others. But maybe being weak had taught her something that strength could not. When you were always fighting just to survive, you learned to notice things that healthy people missed. When everyone expected you to fail, you learned to find solutions that no one else would try. Elena pressed her face against the window and made a decision. She might be locked in a room, but she was not going to give up. The galaxy needed someone who was desperate enough to try the impossible. Someone who had spent their whole life being underestimated. Elena might be the weakest person on Nexus Station. But that was exactly what made her the only one who could save them all. She just had to figure out how to break out of a locked room in the middle of space, get to the most secure laboratory in the station, and stop a countdown that the smartest beings in the galaxy said did not exist. Elena smiled grimly as she began to plan. After a lifetime of being too weak, too sick, and too human, she was finally ready to show everyone what those weaknesses could accomplish. Elena had been locked in her quarters for 2 days when she put her desperate plan into action. The countdown in her head never stopped. Every minute brought the galaxy closer to whatever catastrophe the Harbingers had planned. The League leadership was probably having meetings about her security violation. While the real threat grew stronger, Elena started with the maintenance computer in her room. Every quarters had one, connected to the station's main systems to control temperature, lighting, and life support. Most people never paid attention to it, but Elena had studied every detail of her small prison. The maintenance system was not built to be secure. It was designed to be simple and reliable, with basic logic trees that even a broken system could follow. Elena sat down at the small terminal and began typing commands. She did not try to break the security directly. Instead, Elena used what she knew about psychology and system design. The maintenance enzyme was programmed to respond to emergencies in specific ways. If Elena could convince it that emergencies were happening, it would follow its emergency protocols. First, Elena created a false sensor reading that suggested a hull breach in Section 7. She did this by carefully adjusting the atmospheric pressure readings and temperature data. The system was designed to trust its sensors, so when Elena fed it fake data, it believed there was a serious emergency. The hull breach alert triggered automatic responses throughout the station. Emergency bulkheads began sealing, atmospheric pumps started working harder, and security teams were dispatched to Section 7, but there was no actual breach. So the teams found nothing and began reporting false alarms. While the security teams were busy with the fake hull breach, Elena triggered her second emergency. She accessed the medical monitoring system and created alerts, suggesting that several beings in the research wings were having serious health problems. The medical alerts were designed to take priority over everything else, so medical teams rushed to help patients who were not actually sick. Elena's third trick was the most complex. She accessed the power distribution system and began creating small fluctuations in the electrical grid. Nothing dangerous, but enough to trigger safety protocols. Emergency lighting came on throughout the station, backup systems activated, and the main computer began running diagnostic checks on every system. Within an hour, Nexus Station was in complete chaos. Alarms were ringing everywhere. Emergency teams were running between false emergencies, and the main computer was overwhelmed trying to process thousands of error reports. The station's advanced AI systems, designed by the galaxy's smartest beings, could not understand why their perfect station was falling apart. But Elena understood. She had not attacked the station's security or tried to outthink its advanced systems. Instead, she had used the one thing that highly intelligent species never considered: the power of making everything go wrong at once. In the confusion, Elena's door lock failed. The security system was so busy dealing with emergencies that it defaulted to opening all locks to allow emergency teams to move freely. Elena waited until the corridor outside was empty, then slipped out of her quarters. Getting through the station without being seen was easier than Elena had expected. Everyone was focused on the emergency responses, and the flashing lights and sirens provided perfect cover. Elena's small size, which had always made her feel weak, now helped her move through the chaos without being noticed. Elena made her way to the central laboratory complex in the heart of the station. This was where the League's most important research happened, and where Elena was certain they were storing the assembled Harbinger artifacts. The laboratory was protected by multiple security systems, but the chaos Elena had created was affecting them too. Door locks were failing, sensor grids were reporting false readings, and the security AI was too overloaded to track individual movements. Elena reached the main research chamber just as Ambassador Kethmer and Dr. Zixthala arrived from the opposite direction. They were shouting at each other about the system failures and the need to restore order. "You!" Kethmer roared when he saw Elena. "How did you escape your quarters?" Elena ignored him and looked past them into the research chamber. What she saw made her heart stop. 23 Harbinger artifacts sat on examination tables throughout the large room. They were each about the size of a person, made of dark metal that seemed to absorb light. But they were not inactive. Elena could see energy flowing between them in patterns of blue and purple light. The artifacts were connected, forming a network that pulsed with quantum energy. Elena could feel the countdown in the air itself. The quantum signatures she had detected in the rock samples were nothing compared to this. The assembled artifacts were like a beating heart, pumping energy through space-time itself. "The countdown is almost finished," Elena said, pointing at the artifacts. "Can't you see what's happening?" Dr. Zixthala moved to block Elena's view. "These are valuable archaeological specimens. The human is not authorized to be here. They're not archaeological specimens." Elena shouted over the alarms. "They're components of a weapon that's about to destroy the galaxy." Elena pushed past the crystalline and ran into the chamber. Up close, the artifacts were even more frightening. They hummed with power that Elena could feel in her bones. The energy patterns flowing between them were becoming faster and more complex. Elena ran to the main control console and began studying the readouts. The League scientists had been monitoring the artifacts' energy levels, quantum resonance, and temporal fluctuations. All the readings were increasing rapidly. "Look at your own data," Elena called to Dr. Zixthala. "The energy levels have doubled in the last week. The quantum resonance is building toward a cascade reaction. This is exactly what happened to all the dead worlds." More council members arrived, along with security teams who had finally responded to Elena's location. Elena found herself surrounded by the most powerful beings in the galaxy, all of them staring at her like she was a dangerous animal. "The human has clearly suffered a mental breakdown," Dr. Zixthala announced. "Remove her from the laboratory immediately." Elena felt desperation rising in her chest. She was out of time, out of options, and surrounded by beings who would never listen to her warnings. The countdown was almost finished, and everyone she was trying to save thought she was crazy. Elena looked at the control console again and realized something that made her blood run cold. The League scientists had not just been studying the artifacts, they had been trying to activate them. The console showed input commands, power routing, and activation sequences. "You're trying to turn them on," Elena said in horror. "You think there's some kind of tool you can control." Ambassador Kethmer stepped forward. "The League Council has determined that these artifacts represent advanced technology that could benefit all species. We will not be deterred by human hysteria." Elena watched as Dr. Zixthala moved to the main control panel. The crystalline's transparent fingers began entering commands into the system. Elena could see the energy. Readings spike even higher as the artifacts responded to the input. Elena realized that the League leadership was going to activate the weapon themselves. They were so confident in their own intelligence that they could not see they were about to trigger the same catastrophe that had destroyed countless civilizations. Elena made a decision that she knew would probably kill her. She ran to the quantum interface panel, a device that allowed direct connection to the artifact's energy matrix. The panel was designed to be operated remotely, but Elena knew that someone would have to interface directly with the quantum field to shut down the cascade reaction. "Stop!" Kethmer roared, but Elena was already connecting the interface cables to herself. The moment the quantum field touched Elena's nervous system, pain exploded through her body. It felt like lightning was running through her veins and fire was burning in her brain. Elena screamed, but forced herself to stay connected to the interface. Elena's overactive immune system, the same system that had made her sick for years, suddenly found something real to fight. Instead of attacking her own healthy tissue, her immune response began adapting to the quantum radiation flooding her body. The chronic inflammation that had weakened her became a defense against energy that would have killed any healthy person instantly. Through the pain, Elena could feel the countdown approaching 0. She could sense the cascade reaction building in the artifacts, feel the quantum energy preparing to tear through space-time itself. Elena reached out with her mind and began dismantling the connections between the artifacts. Elena's human intuition, which the League had dismissed as primitive pattern recognition, allowed her to understand the quantum matrix in ways that pure logic could not. She could feel the flow of energy like music, see the mathematical patterns like colors, and understand the countdown like a heartbeat. Elena began shutting down the countdown sequence. But she realized she was not just stopping it, she was reversing it. The quantum energy that had been building toward destruction was now flowing backward, unmaking the connections between all Harbinger artifacts across the galaxy. Elena felt every artifact simultaneously as the reversal wave spread through space. On thousands of worlds, in hundreds of League research facilities, Harbinger technology was shutting down forever. Elena woke up in the medical bay 6 days later. Her body felt different, not sick for the first time in years, but not exactly healthy either. She could sense quantum fields around her like a new kind of sight. When she moved her hand, she could see the space-time ripples her motion created. Dr. Kethmer was sitting beside her bed, but the proud ambassador looked smaller somehow. His scales had lost their shine, and his voice was quiet when he spoke. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, "how are you feeling?" Elena sat up slowly. Through the medical bay window, she could see Nexus Station in chaos. Ships were arriving and departing constantly, but they were not the sleek League vessels she remembered. These ships looked crude and primitive, human ships from Earth. What happened? Elena asked. Kethmer's expression was grim. When you destroyed the Harbinger artifacts, you created a quantum feedback wave that spread across the galaxy. Every piece of technology based on Harbinger principles stopped working permanently. Elena felt a chill of fear. How much technology? More than we realized, Kethmer admitted. It turns out that much of our advanced technology was built on principles we reverse-engineered from Harbinger artifacts over the centuries. Our faster-than-light drives, our quantum computers, our energy systems, all of it was connected to their technology. Elena looked out the window again at the human ships. And human technology? Unaffected, Kethmer said. Human civilization developed independently. Your chemical rockets, your radio communications, your primitive computers, none of it was based on Harbinger technology. Elena began to understand. So human ships are the only ones that can still travel between stars. Kethmer nodded. Earth has become the center of galactic civilization overnight. Every species in the League is dependent on human technology and human ships to maintain contact with their colonies and trade partners. Elena watched a human cargo ship dock with the station. She could see League officials, beings who had looked down on humans just weeks ago, waiting respectfully to greet the human crew. The Galactic League is finished, Kethmer continued. We are forming a new organization called the Galactic Collective. Earth will be the central world, and human representatives will lead the new government. Elena tried to process this information. The species that had treated humans as barely evolved primitives were now dependent on human help for basic survival. What about you? Elena asked. What will the Draconians do? For the first time since Elena had known him, Kethmer looked embarrassed. My government has asked me to negotiate a formal alliance with Earth. We are hoping that humans will help us maintain communication with our colonies until we can develop new technology. Elena almost laughed. The proud Draconian Empire, which had ruled star systems for thousands of years, was now asking humans for help with basic space travel. Dr. Zixthala entered the medical bay, moving much more slowly than usual. The crystalline's light seemed dimmer, and cracks had appeared in her transparent body. Dr. Vasquez, the crystalline said, I owe you an apology. We should have listened to your warnings. Elena studied her former supervisor. What happened to you? Crystalline biology is heavily integrated with quantum technology, Dr. Zixtala explained. When the Harbinger artifacts were destroyed, the quantum feedback damaged our physical structure. Many of my people are diminished. Elena felt sympathy for the being who had dismissed her so completely. Will you recover? In time, perhaps. But we will never be what we were before. None of us will. Dr. Zixtala moved closer to Elena's bed. We have established new research protocols based on your recommendations. All major decisions must now include input from multiple perspectives, especially from species or individuals who might see threats differently. Elena nodded. The Harbinger Protocol? Yes, named after your discovery. It mandates that we listen to warnings from unexpected sources, especially those who might be considered weak or disadvantaged. Elena looked at her hands. They seemed normal, but she could see quantum energy flowing through them like rivers of light. What about me? What am I now? Dr. Zixtala and Kethmer exchanged glances. We do not know, the crystalline admitted. The quantum radiation changed you at the cellular level. Your immune system has adapted to quantum fields in ways we have never seen. You can perceive and manipulate fundamental forces that even our most advanced sensors cannot detect. Elena closed her eyes and reached out with her new senses. She could feel the quantum signatures of every being on the station. She could sense the flow of energy through the ship's systems. Most remarkably, she could detect quantum communications across vast distances. There's something else, Elena said, opening her eyes. I can sense signals from the edge of the galaxy. They have the same quantum signature as the Harbinger artifacts. Both aliens stared at her. What kind of signals? Kethmer asked. Elena concentrated, trying to interpret what she was sensing. It's like the artifacts we destroyed were just the first wave. There's something else out there, something much larger. The Harbingers themselves might not be extinct. Dr. Zixtala's light flickered with concern. Are we still in danger? Elena stood up from her bed and walked to the window. Outside, human ships continued arriving at the station, bringing supplies and expertise to species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. The sight filled Elena with a strange mixture of pride and responsibility. I don't know, Elena said honestly. But if the Harbingers are still out there, we'll face them together. All of us, humans, draconians, crystallines, and everyone else. Elena turned back to her former colleagues. The difference is that now we know the value of different perspectives. The League fell because you were too proud to listen to warnings from someone you considered weak. The collective will succeed because it's built on the idea that strength comes from diversity. 3 months later, Elena stood in her new laboratory on Earth. It was much larger than her old workspace on Nexus Station, with equipment provided by grateful alien governments. But Elena still preferred to work alone during the late-night hours when her insomnia kept her awake. Elena's role in the new Galactic Collective was unique. She served as both a scientist and a diplomat, using her ability to sense quantum fields to detect dangers that others might miss. Her chronic illness had been completely transformed by her exposure to quantum energy. She was now stronger and healthier than she had ever been, but also fundamentally changed in ways that were still being studied. The quantum signals from the galaxy's edge had grown stronger in recent weeks. Elena was convinced that something was coming, something that would make the Harbinger artifacts look like simple toys. But this time, the galaxy would be ready. Elena's work on the Harbinger Protocol had been adopted by every species in the collective. Research teams now included members from different backgrounds and perspectives. Decision-making processes required input from individuals who might see problems differently. Most importantly, warnings from unexpected sources were taken seriously rather than dismissed. Elena smiled as she looked at her latest readings. The signals from the galaxy's edge were complex and difficult to interpret, but Elena was no longer working alone. Human pattern recognition, crystalline logical analysis, draconian tactical thinking, and Vortani energy manipulation were all being applied to the problem. Together, they might be able to understand what was coming. Elena's computer chimed with an incoming message from the edge of the galaxy. The signal was clear and unmistakable. It was a communication directed specifically at Earth. Elena began the translation process. Working with linguists and mathematicians from across the collective, when the translation was complete, Elena read the message aloud to her empty laboratory. Greetings to the species that destroyed our advanced scouts. We are the Harbingers. We are returning home. Prepare for evaluation. Elena looked out her laboratory window at the night sky above Earth. Somewhere out there, the real Harbingers were coming. They would find a galaxy that was very different from the one their scouts had tried to destroy. Instead of a collection of isolated species competing for dominance, they would face a unified collective built on the principle that every perspective had value. Elena had started as the weakest member of an advanced civilization. She had been too sick to compete with healthy individuals, too human to match alien intelligence, too primitive to understand advanced technology. But those very weaknesses had allowed her to see dangers that strength and intelligence had missed. Now, Elena was something new. Part human, part quantum entity, part bridge between species. She was still the researcher working late nights in her laboratory, but when she spoke, the galaxy listened. She had not conquered the League through force or politics, but by being exactly what she had always been. Too stubborn to accept that her weaknesses made her worthless. Too human to give up when faced with impossible odds. Elena began preparing her next report. The Harbingers were coming, but they would find that the galaxy had learned something important from Elena's example. Sometimes the strongest weapon against an overwhelming enemy was not superior technology or greater intelligence. Sometimes the strongest weapon was refusing to break when everyone expected you to. Elena smiled and began typing her recommendations for defending against the returning Harbingers.